Hey, Vedanta, are you there?
Hi, Bede. I'm here, back here.
Good. Now, I just want to start up again. Remember we were talking last time, my teacher said something very interesting to me. She said that experience can only teach us two things. It can teach, the first thing it teaches is that no experience can ever give us happiness. That's the first thing. So we can look, the only thing we can learn from experience is two things. The first thing is that no experience can ever give us happiness. And the second thing that experience can give us, it can tell us how well we can assimilate the teaching. Now, I just want to just go into this first one, though, the fact that experiences can never give us happiness. But I just want to just read a quote from Swami Dayananda as to what samsara is, this condition that we're constantly caught in. And this is what he says. This is what we call samsara, the dependence upon another person or another situation for our own sense of well-being. This dependence is samsara. As usual, quite a beautiful definition. Now, the thing you noticed that what he said was that it's dependence on people and things for our sense of well-being.
Yes, there are two keywords there, the well-being and dependence, isn't it?
That's exactly right.
Right.
And it's a question of where do we find our sense of well-being, or where do we think our well-being, our sense of well-being is to be found? Now, according to Vedanta, because we're completely fascinated by, and we've got a compulsive drive towards people and objects and things and ideas to give us a sense of well-being. And it's completely and utterly compulsive. We are fascinated. We have a passion for things other than ourselves. And the reason that we have a passion for things other than themselves is not for the things themselves and what they are in themselves, but because they can give us a sense of well-being.
Yes, when you use this word compulsive, I recognize this. I mean, it's like, it is almost like an addiction that you look outside for your sense of well-being. But how am I supposed to even reduce this?
Now, Vedanta's got a very interesting take on this, right? It's a very practical take on this. If we could discover a sense of well-being, independent of whether we get what we want, you see, if we could discover quite practically and factually a sense of well-being that wasn't dependent on objects, what would happen to the compulsion?
I guess you remove the fuel behind it, so it would probably diffuse a little bit.
That's the whole point. That's precisely the whole point. You see, we're not going to become dispassionate about objects that we totally and utterly believe and need for our sense of well-being. It's not possible to become dispassionate unless we can come to really understand that those things are not a source of well-being.
Yes. Yes. So we need to understand. That is what you are saying.
We need to clearly see that objects can never give us happiness.
Yes, which means automatically that I have to be able to, completely accept that my experiences of looking for objects are actually foolish. That is the problem, isn't it?
Yes, and we also have to see this again and again. Now, this is considered in Vedanta one of the first qualifications in order to study Vedanta, because you see, while our whole attention is absorbed in these things other than ourself, to bring about happiness or a sense of well-being in ourselves, we can't possibly study Vedanta. So so the growth that's important, this is where in Vedanta we have two aspects. We've got on one hand self-discovery, on the other hand self-growth. Now self-growth actually is a process where we become, relatively speaking, less dependent on objects, practically speaking. So that unless we can develop an attitude of dispassion based on an understanding that, yes, you see, if you really genuinely believe, and you'll know when you're dispassionate because you won't feel the striving, like what we were talking about before. We can say, I know what dispassion is. It's very easy to say what the theory says, but dispassion as an attitude that becomes embodied, an embodied attitude where we actually are dispassionate. In other words, we are no longer grasping and grabbing and hoping and wishing, and then all the suffering that's involved in that. To a relative degree, first of all, we have to become relatively dispassionate. Now, that is not possible unless we become, as an individual living in this world, relatively speaking, secure, composed, and content within ourselves.
Yes, I agree. So basically, you are telling me at the moment of the compulsion, and when I am actually chewing on this chocolate, it's just a little too late. I got to be prepared before that, and keep the chocolate in front of me.
Well, the first thing is the truthful acknowledgement of the dependency. Now, this is as I've explained before. It's very, very hard. You see, because we have this absolute striving to look good in our own eyes and the eyes of other people. I mean, you imagine if you went up to someone and said, "I'd just like to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm fundamentally very insecure. I feel sort of inadequate and sort of small and inferior, and I feel completely discontented with myself. And because of this, I want to try and fix this by, maybe talking to you, because maybe you can give me something so I'll feel a little bit better about myself, maybe a little bit of praise or something like that." If you did that, I'm not suggesting you do it. But you see, it is an unacceptable fact. It is an unacceptable fact. It goes against our notions of ourself, our lovely notions of ourself, the notions that we have that are important for us that ward off that feeling of inadequacy. So
Yes.
one of the...
I guess can I take a moment? I was looking at myself telling my boss the same, and he will think, what a loser. I don't want her around. She's got an infectious attitude. Let's get rid of her.
That's right, because we all know we've got to have a positive mental attitude.
And then before I go, I tell my boss, by the way, you are also suffering the same samsara.
No.
That would definitely get me out of the payroll.
Yeah. So this is the thing, you see, to be honest about this, to have a recognition that this universal problem that we all suffer from, this universal problem is something that I have, and I am not going to become dispassionate until I have a reasonable not an absolute understanding, because that comes later, but a reasonable very clear that I understand. And when we understand, like I told you, when we really understand, we understand with our mind, our heart, and our body. It becomes an attitude. Before that, it's just a notion. It's very easy to talk about being dispassionate. It is so easy. I mean, I could mouth off about it with complete eloquence. But you see, I would not say that I'm dispassionate. I am at times, and I'm becoming more and more dispassionate, but fundamentally, my fundamental stance, I could not possibly at this point in my life say I have dispassion.
But Bede, the question arose in me, do I need Vedanta for this? Isn't that just the normal aging process that you become automatically more dispassionate?
No, that doesn't happen.
Okay.
That can't happen. Because you see, we can't help but pursue well-being. We can't help but want to and desire to be happy. That is not an acquired desire. That's innate with every. Do you know anybody, if you went into a room and said, could everyone put up their hand who doesn't want to be happy? It doesn't matter where you go in the world, that's not going to happen. So it's a question of where the problem is not happiness. The problem is where it's to be found.
Yes.
So the mistake is where it's found. And you see, what Vedanta says is that basically you are what you're looking for. In other words, they say that your nature, what you actually are is the happiness you're looking for. Now, to come to know and appreciate that fact is what Vedanta is all about. But at the moment, we're not talking about that. The fact is we don't appreciate that fact. So because we don't appreciate that fact, it's as though it doesn't exist.
Yes.
So that because, and this is why, because what Vedanta basically says is because we don't know our nature, because we're ignorant of who we really are, we then have erroneous notions about ourselves. In other words, we're unhappy, we're insecure, we're inadequate, we're dissatisfied. So we have these experience of ourselves that we are not. And then we then go about trying to fix this experience that really isn't actually that true. It's an experience, not a reality. We're caught in a story, if you like.
Yes.
So the only possible way, so it's a very, very important point to come to this point, to understand, first of all, in order for me to discover real happiness, I have to become, the direction to move in is dispassion. I have to see again and again my dependence. Now, this means we have to be honest. This means that when we suddenly see, I was bragging a little bit there. I was engaging in one of my numerous activities to prove myself to other people. Oopsie daisy. Now, when you first start doing this, it is rather hard. I found it very hard. You know, when I saw myself, trying to prove myself and bragging a bit and all of this sort of stuff and being obsessed about what people thought of me and all that stuff, do you know what I mean? I found it a little bit hard. And I spoke to my teacher about it and said, I says, I'm in a mess. And she says, Vedanta here isn't to add to your burden. You see, you've got to be dispassionate about the view. After a while, you can actually laugh about it. Oh, there I go again. It's not important. It's not important. It doesn't mean anything in a negative sense. Because when you understand that you must develop a dispassionate attitude, you become very interested in seeing again and again your dependence. And also seeing, now the thing is this, does dependence work? It hurts. Dependence hurts.
Yes, so I actually have to experience that dependence hurts.
Dependence hurts. That no object, you see, when your life and happiness depends on other people, every time they are not in a way that you want them to be, you will suffer.
I fully agree with that.
And it seems to be a 60-30 ratio, 30% happiness, 60% pain.
Yes, and I do notice in me, wishing that these other people change and the situation changes, compulsively insisting that the situation changes.
That's right. That's right. And that's based on the idea that the problem isn't samsara, my dependence on them for my well-being. The problem exists with them. And this is why it is completely and utterly important to see again and again what we're involved in, this dependency that we're happening. So that all our pain and suffering actually is dependency in another form.
That is so important to see. Yes, I agree with you. And what I liked about what you said just now is that you have to be completely honest with yourself and look at each of these experiences as an opportunity to develop dispassion.
Absolutely. We see in Vedanta, you see, instead of life being a means to acquire and get the happiness we want from other people and things, we're going to convert it in a means in order to be able to prepare ourselves for the knowledge of ourself. So we use life as a means. We use experience to gain the dispassion we need so that we can discover a sense of well-being that isn't dependent on the presence or absence of objects. That's what they call freedom in Vedanta.
You have caught my attention, Bede. So please go ahead. I mean, this is interesting.
Okay, so what we'll do is when we meet again, what we'll do is we'll talk about this particular fact. We're going to talk about basically this idea that we need to see again and again what our dependence. Now, the other thing also we moved to the next idea, which she said, was that experiences teach us how well we've assimilated the teaching. Now, this, you see, experience becomes a mirror to show us how non-dispassionate we are again and again and again.
That's brilliant.
So it gives us an orientation, doesn't it? It gives us an orientation because we're using experience to show us how well we've understood. You see, and what we're trying to understand is that no, and this is what we're trying to learn, because the only thing that experience the only thing we can learn from experience, we're trying to learn that no object or person or thing or idea can give us happiness. Okay, so what we'll do is in the next time we meet, we'll go further into this. Okay, well, thanks very much.
Great, sounds good. Bye.
Bye.